Surprise, folks. This episode isn't what I promised it was going to be. Here's the deal. After a year of publishing the New 52 line of titles, DC decided to do not really an event. And calling it a stunt feels a little bit insulting, so I guess it's a mini event, but I guess stunt is kind of the best word for it, too. I'm going to refer to it as a mini event called Zero Month. Basically, DC decided to publish a zero issue for all of their titles, set before whatever was already going on in their individual comics. They decided to schedule this as their first year was wrapping up. So Aquaman issue 13 got pushed back a single month, and I picked up issue 0 in November of 2011 instead. The end of issue 12 even says, "Yo! Buy Aquaman issue 0 next month and then come back for the thrilling conclusion of this story arc in 2 months. And I am sorry, but that is stupid as hell. I have been trapped in a glass cage of emotion for this entire story arc. I have met a bunch of new characters, I have seen some of them die, I have learned the history between Aquaman and Dr. Shin and Black Manta, and I have had profound insight into the character of Aquaman that I did not think was possible. And you expect me to wait another month? Ooh, just why that makes me mad. But, clearly there is a plan in place, right? This flashback issue is probably going to reveal some kind of pertinent information that is going to play a pivotal role in how this story plays out, I thought. So let's give it a chance. The whole reason that I only talk about finished books here on the show is so that I can have all of the context for what is going on, after all, and provide as much insight as I can into the title. So I read issue 0 again. And it has nothing, but nothing, to do with the current story arc. If anything, it works better to switch gears into the next Aquaman story arc, so I'm going to do a little bit of editorializing here for the show. This episode is only going to cover issue 13, and we're going to close out the Others storyline with it. I want to take the back half of this episode to comment on some larger thoughts that I have in general, and just kind of close the arc out, and then next episode we will cover issue 0, all of its implications, and its place in the continuity. Then, with episode 26.10, we will be back to the normal pace of things. Cool? Capiche? S'alright? S'alright. Issue 13 returns us and Arthur back to Siberia over 5 years ago. He and the others saved that village from an avalanche that Black Manta had set off, but they lost him in the process. Arthur was upset, and so he lashed out at his friends verbally. Kahina helped calm him down with a little bit of prophecy. She assured him that one day he would be happy. It turns out that the others didn't just leave that village immediately, though. Arthur sits on a nearby hill, his trident hanging limply from his fingers. Vostok approaches him and, in a quiet voice, says that Manta escaped, but all of the people that they rescued are safe. You were engineered to prefer a life of isolation, Arthur says. So why did you care about those villagers, Vostok? Vostok pushes up the faceplate of his helmet and says that he still has a heart, just like you. In the present day, however, Vostok lies dead before Aquaman, blood running down his face. Tears streak down Aquaman's and he snarls, "Black Manta dies now." They're all going to die if they don't get out of here soon, Prisoner says. The island is sinking. Prisoner's force field is back up, contradicting the end of issue 12, protecting the group from falling large rocks and incoming seawater. There's a bit of dialogue that recaps Black Manta's position, that he has the scepter, that it has caused this earthquake, he is retreating to his ship, and he still has the Seal of Clarity and the Globe of Transportation. If he makes it off of this island, Black Manta can go anywhere in the world. We then cut to Black Manta, whose lackeys are loading Atlantean art pieces into his ship. He contacts someone, his mysterious partner, I'm assuming, and tells them that he has the scepter. This mystery person replies that the storm is moving east. When it's over the rig, he'll be there. Manta confirms that they're going to have his payment, and the voice says yes. Okay, so this person's not a partner, they're more of a client. Okay. Inside, Arthur tells Mara to get everyone to safety, including Vostok's body. He is going after Manta alone. The others protest this, but Arthur is adamant and mad. 2 of his friends have died already, and, more importantly, he doesn't want Mara to see what he's going to do with Black Manta. Then he punches through a stone wall. He finally gets his eyes on Manta, who is just barely sticking out of the top of his submarine. He gives Arthur a snarky salute and teleports away in golden light. My name is Ben, and this is Comic Book Breakdown, episode 26.8 of Aquaman, The Value of Aquaman. As far as opening scenes go, I think that is the single most summary-ishest one that author Jeff Johns has given us so far. And for good reason, too, given that at the time of publication, readers had now been waiting for 2 months to get this issue due to the interruption of the Zero issue. Thankfully, Johns is a skilled enough writer that the expository dialogue doesn't feel out of place or very forced. Yawara is the one who notes that Manta still has her orb, and that feels like something that she would take note of, right? After all, she has had possession of it for years, and I am sure that she wants it back, so her keeping that in mind makes sense. And the scene is pretty fast-paced too, being just 3 pages set in the modern day. The opening page with Vostok was mostly done to remind us of his loss, and also to tie our emotional state back in with Arthur's. Again, it had been 2 months since we saw Vostok give his life in order to protect Arthur, and we probably forgot that loss. But for Arthur, that loss is fresh, it's immediate, and of course it is going to motivate him. So Johns has to remind us of how upset we should be going into this issue. So we're sad, and Arthur is mad. Let's go kill Black Manta. We then return to the living room, where Arthur has rejoined the others. The operative is able to track his ship around the globe, but thanks to the orb, he is still hopping all over the globe, seemingly at random. Which one of these positions is his current position is a mystery. But at least they know that he isn't working with Dr. Shin at this point, so he must be meeting with someone else. From a nearby chair, a worn and weary Dr. Shin says that this was all his fault. He's the one who hired Black Manta to prove that he had found an Atlantean. I'm sorry. Your father was my friend. He was such a good friend to me, and I betrayed him. Arthur clenches his fist. He has blood on his hands, too. Black Manta didn't kill his dad. The heart attack did. Even the coroner said that it was inevitable. But Arthur still went after Black Manta. He is the one who wrapped his hands around Manta's dad's neck and killed him. The operative pipes in here. You know, Black Manta's father was a wanted criminal, Arthur, for numerous crimes, including murder. He was far from innocent. Bowing his head, Arthur says that so is he. He walks over to a wall and pushes a red button. The wall is revealed to be a door, which slides up. I didn't tell you about the others, or about Black Manta, because I'm ashamed, Mara, Arthur says. I'm ashamed of who I am. Aquaman is nothing but a costume. Arthur now stares at an old Aquaman costume displayed inside of a glass case. The orange scale shirt, green gloves, green pants with yellow plating running down the sides, the aglyph along his belt. Around the neck there is a series of jewels. Mara pushes past him and opens the display. She pulls out the shirt and tells him to put it on anyway. And he looks at her confused. Why? Because I asked you to, she answers, holding it out. They have all made mistakes, she says, but you learned from them. You became a better person, and you can't forget that. You cannot fall back to a place of anger and isolation, she says. Don't be like the rest of the world. Mara cups his cheek and moves in for a hug. Don't undervalue who Aquaman truly is. Well, I was not expecting an emotional breakthrough from this issue. Thank you, Mara. Oh, boy. The others agree with her statement, saying that unlike Arthur, they haven't changed at all. And maybe they should, but the operative's computer chimes, interrupting them. They have Manta's signal. The villain's ship appears next to an oil rig right in the middle of a storm, as promised. Manta's big red eyes scan the water. Where are you? A bright light pierces through the dark water, and a large ship shaped like a crustacean rises to the surface. Several areas of it glow with light, but I can't tell if the light is unnatural or bioluminescence, and if this creature has just been, reworked and had some stuff added to it or not. This could be a living creature that has been turned into a vehicle, or it could be a vehicle made to resemble a living creature. For the life of me, I cannot tell. And Jeff Johns has not provided enough background on Atlantis for me to have a good idea one way or the other. From inside the craft, the buyer asks if Manta has the scepter, and Manta demands his payment first. A circular door opens, and 3 armored Atlanteans, who look a lot like the guys who tried to retrieve the A-glyph back in issue 5, step out. They have treasure chests in their hands, which they pass off to Manta's lackeys. This is the treasure that Manta and his father were attempting to salvage when his dad was killed. The buyer hopes that its sentimental value is equal to its financial value. Manta doesn't care what the buyer thinks, and he hefts the scepter. The second part of their deal is still good. Quote, "In the aftermath, the surface is mine," end quote. The buyer agrees. Black Manta holds the scepter out, and Aquaman intercepts it. No swearing. Yeah. As he does, we see the buyer take a step back and quietly whisper, "King Arthur." Which is literally the first time that I actually get that he's called King Arthur. It's great. Aquaman tells the others to handle Manta's men fast. They have no idea how many Atlanteans are in that ship, and they don't need a prolonged fight. He then looks at the ship and tries to address whoever is inside of it. "Is it you, Orm? If it's you, come on out and we'll talk." Whoever is inside says that they can't face him, not under these circumstances. While Aquaman is distracted, Manta fires off a heat ray at him. "You never give up, do you?" he asks. "Well, neither do I." As they begin to fight, the buyer orders his men to retrieve the scepter. They cannot leave without it. So one of the men fires off a tow line, it wraps around the scepter, and they yank it clean from Arthur's grasp. They quickly retreat back inside their crab-ish vehicle and sink back into the ocean. As they do, the buyer orders someone to raise the storm levels and to kill his friends, meaning Aquaman's friends. Prisoner, the man who has chosen to wear a burlap sack over his head this entire adventure, somehow has trouble seeing in the dark and the rain. Quite frankly, I'm surprised that he can breathe through that right now. Black Manta takes advantage of that fact, blasting him with his heat ray before firing a harpoon into one of his forearms just below the manacle. "How fitting that one more of your friends gets to die before this is over," he says. But then Aquaman's trident tears through the left side of his helmet from behind. With a twist, the helmet is torn clean off. But Black Manta isn't a chump. He's not going down from just that. He has immediately drawn his combat knives and he stabs at Arthur, channeling an electrical charge through one of them. "Good," he growls. "Get closer. The closer you get, the more I can hurt you." He tries to shoot another harpoon at Prisoner, but Aquaman latches onto his arm, grabbing the harpoon. Sparks jump from Manta's body to his. Remember, he can push an electrical charge through his suit, but Aquaman just pushes through the pain. Prisoner tells Arthur to get away. His life isn't worth risking death for. But Arthur says that it is. They are all worth dying for. And then he twists Black Manta's arm at the elbow, snapping it clean around. He throws him to the roof of the submarine once, twice, repeating his sins as he does so. Black Manta slit Kahina's throat. He severed Vostok's spine. Arthur should do even worse to him. Manta, beaten and wounded, is bent over. "Fine. I'm unarmed. Finish this." The others have subdued Manta's men by this point. They are all kneeling on the roof of the submarine, hands behind their heads. The others circle around Arthur, waiting to see it happen. And he turns away from Manta. "It is finished," he says. Manta fights onto his feet. "No! It doesn't end like this. It can't end like this. They're like Ahab and the monster. Show them what kind of murderer you really are," he shouts. "Kill me!" Arthur looks over his shoulder, just barely. "One day," he says, "he probably will. But it won't be like this. It will never be like this again." Sometime later, everyone is back at the shore, at some kind of dock. Manta and his men are being arrested. An EMT looks after Dr. Shin, who is wrapped in a blanket. Mara asks Arthur if he knows who Manta was working for. She heard him say his brother's name, Orm. Does he think it was him? Arthur isn't sure. Orm doesn't normally hide from him. The operative volunteers to look after Kahina and Vostok's relics, with Yawara's help. Standing off by himself, Prisoner assumes that this means they're all gonna go their separate ways again. They'll all go home, and he'll go back to the hospital. Arthur says no, not this time. He needs to make a change, just like Arthur did. Dominic. And yes, this is the first time that someone refers to Prisoner by his given name. Dominic said that he was drawn to the families of his squad, that he can't forget them. Well, maybe they need to find peace too. They all need to make peace with the past. Arthur apologizes for failing to do so before, and promises that he won't let them down again. He won't forget about them. And please, know that he never did. We then jump to Cedar Falls, Iowa, where a plain white truck pulls up to a small farmhouse. In the passenger seat, we see a collection of photos, taken from Dominic's wall, and the manacles from Atlantis. If you couldn't guess, this is Dominic Torres, aka Prisoner. He exits the car, knocks on the door, and a kid answers it. The kid calls for his mom, who comes to the door next, and she looks at Dominic. For the first time in this entire story arc, we see his face plain as day. "Mrs. Antonsen?" he says. She asks who he is, and the ghostly image of another man appears over Dominic's face for just a second. That face she recognizes as her dead husband, Paul. She and her child step back, surprised and maybe a little bit scared. "Paul is right here," Dominic says. "He misses you. He wanted me to tell you that." The woman and the kid hug Dominic. The ghostly image wavers and fades, rising into the air like smoke, Paul Antonsen finally having found peace. Behind Prisoner, a small squad of ghostly men wait for their turn. We then cut to Amnesty Bay. Arthur, Mara, and Aquadog stand on the pier at their lighthouse. Arthur tells her about his mom and how his dad watched for her every morning. She never came back, and it broke his dad's heart. This whole time when Arthur was trying to protect her, first from the danger of Black Manta and then from his own past, he was really scared of losing her like he lost his mom. Mara assures Arthur that she isn't going anywhere. He accepted her despite her past, and so she'll accept him too. All of him. They kiss. Aquadog leaps up and barks. And somewhere else, yes, this story is putting the Lord of the Rings to shame with its multiple endings, we see 3 glowing orbs that show the image of the couple kissing. Somebody is spying on Aquaman. A voice warns that Mara will stand in their way. A second voice says, "Then they'll have to remove her. Praise the king." "Yes," the first voice says. "Praise the king." Jeff Johns just knocking out these emotional gut punch issues one after the other, huh? Damn. In terms of the overall story here, I think that this wraps up pretty well. For 90% of this arc, the assumed threat was that of Black Manta hunting the others, and that threat has now been handled. Black Manta has been stopped, he and his lackeys have been arrested, and, at least for now, the others are safe. More importantly, for this particular comic, because it is titled Aquaman after all, we have gone on one hell of a journey with Arthur. We learned how and why his father died, and Arthur seems to have come to peace with it. He says that the coroner told him that the heart attack was inevitable, and I kind of wonder if this ending scene with Mera isn't meant to suggest that Tom Curry died because of a weakened heart, because his love left him. That's certainly a bit more of a romantic idea than I would expect from an American comic book, but I think that it's a cute idea. I also think that Arthur is taking the first steps towards forgiving Dr. Shin as well. He witnessed Shin's reluctance to betray him on the Dead King's Island, and Arthur chose to save Shin rather than assassinate Manta. Even later on, when Shin is apologizing again, we can see that Arthur is kind of wrestling with his emotions, but he doesn't protest it. He doesn't argue. And I already told y'all that I thought that Arthur kept going to Dr. Shin for advice because he didn't really want to hate him anymore. I think that the part of Arthur sees Shin as a father figure, and maybe now they can start to have a more healthy relationship. I still think that Shin's role in Aquaman's story as the expert on Atlantis is really unexplained and is almost a bit nonsensical, but I also don't think that the author plans to address it at this point, so I'm probably going to give up on pointing this out. Perhaps the biggest moment regarding Arthur happens in the living room, when he confesses to Mera and the others that, to him, Aquaman is a lie. So what does that mean? It means that the vision of Aquaman that everyone else has, that he's a superhero, a prestigious member of the Justice League, a noble king, a fierce warrior, none of that is how Arthur views himself. He hates himself for killing Manta's father, and he tells Mera that he has done worse things than that. I am not sure what those things are, but the accidental killing is bad enough to kind of prove his point as far as I'm concerned. He's a murderer, no better than Black Manta is, and he hates himself for it. I appreciate that Johns does try to provide an emotional out for Arthur in that scene, even if he doesn't end up taking it. The operative mentions that Manta and his father were both criminals, wanted for crimes as bad as murder, so it's not really a big deal if they died, right? But Arthur knows better. What he did was wrong, and he has never forgiven himself for it. In the world of comic books, it's easy to accept that Aquaman killed one guy one time, and he was a bad guy, and he's done a lot of good things otherwise, so the karmic scales are pretty well balanced, right? As far as the audience is concerned, Aquaman gets a pass with this. But if one of my friends was hanging out with me, and he told me the same thing that Arthur told the others, that he had gone to kill a guy and mistakenly killed that guy's dad instead, and then never turned himself in for it, and he was never punished or anything like that, it would definitely change how I viewed that person for sure. Comic book morality is not equal to real-world morality, and Johns is trying to treat Aquaman as a real person in his writing, so he still feels guilt over this accident. To that end, the character of Aquaman has become a mask that Arthur puts on. The costume, the heroics. It's one part a disguise hiding how Arthur really feels about himself, and one part a promise to do better, right? To be better. Because Black Manta accidentally killed Tom Curry, and then just went back to his life. Arthur accidentally killed Black Manta's dad, and he has spent a lifetime helping other people since. He is motivated by that guilt, and he strives to do better because of it. And look at that! He has. We saw Arthur try to save the creatures from the trench. We've seen him stay up late, beating himself up over their fate. And even in this story, when Arthur has a chance to outright kill Black Manta, to end all of this once and for all and get away with it, he chooses not to do it. Because he doesn't want to be that angry, isolated, vengeance-hungry young man anymore, because he's grown beyond that. Before I forget, I also want to mention that I flooping love the fact that it's Mera who reminds him of his true value. Mera has only known Arthur since all of that stuff in his past has happened, So she knows who he is right now in that moment. And he has been a noble king. He has saved the world with the Justice League. And he has saved many lives just as an adventurer. Maybe Aquaman isn't who Arthur was back then, but Aquaman is who he has become, and that identity serves as a reminder of that journey for her. That is the man that she fell in love with, and the man that she betrayed her father for. It is a great way to show Mera's depth of feeling without taking away from her warrior nature. And this story beat was also a great way of showing that there is more to Aquaman than water-based powers and a silly costumes. He has internal depths that rival that of the trench itself. And I will never get sick of gleefully saying that, largely because I never expected to say that going into this comic. A big part of this arc was introducing one of Aquaman's greatest enemies, Black Manta. In terms of making him seem threatening, I definitely think the team nailed it. They also gave him some solid pathos by having Arthur kill his father accidentally. If you're gonna have a blood feud with the dude, him killing your pops is a pretty solid motivation for it. I also think that there was a ton of unexplored potential for him too. How did he feel when Dr. Shen hired him to get a sample of Arthur's blood, claiming that he was an Atlantean? Did he laugh at that, or did he just go, yeah, alright, get a sample of his blood, I can do that? How did Black Manta attempt to get it? How did he feel when Tom Curry collapsed with a heart attack? We were told that Tom had the attack as a result of Black Manta's fight, so I'm picturing that Manta was standing over a knockdown Arthur, real menacingly, getting ready to do whatever he was going to do to collect that blood sample, and then Tom ran over and shoved him or something. And then maybe they started to tussle and Tom cries out, "Ah!" and clutches his chest, and then he falls back. And Manta would be confused because, he didn't do whatever that is. What is going on here? Arthur would then rush to his dad and be like, "Dad, what's wrong?" And Tom would clutch at his chest and choke out, "Need help! Hospital!" And so Arthur would pick him up and then he would glare at Manta and say something like, "If you follow us, I will kill you." And then he would just leap away. And Black Manta would be standing there what do I do now? Imagine being in Black Manta's shoes in that moment. He wasn't trying to permanently hurt Arthur. He wasn't trying to kill him or anything like that. He was just trying to collect a blood sample. And then his dad just collapsed in front of him. Did he have any kind of need to, finish the job? Did he care about the job at all? Or was he just fine with letting him go? Maybe Black Manta actually sympathized with Arthur's clear devotion to his father, seeing his own love for his dad reflected in it. And then, a few days later, he climbs back onto his boat when he's doing a dive. And there's Arthur standing over the dead body of his dad. That, no swearing, is epic. That's truly Shakespearean. And it is totally worth taking time to explore that. As far as I'm concerned, I want a 4 to 6 issue arc covering that story, right? And then we also have the cat and mouse game that Black Manta engaged in with the others during Arthur's 5 years old globetrotting session. That time period could be rife with different stories and encounters, the barest glimpse of which we saw here. So in terms of making me invest in him as a character and want more, Jeff Johns and the creative team absolutely delivered. But in terms of giving us the basics about a character, making sure that I understood who this person was, I don't know anything about this guy. Just as Johns didn't tell us Aquaman's real name for several issues, I do not know Black Manta's real name. I don't know how good his relationship was with his father. I don't know what criminal activities he and his dad got up to, or how Black Manta felt about them. I don't know how Manta gets his tech either. Does he design that stuff, or does someone do it for him, like Edna Node in The Incredibles? Manta clearly has at least a headquarters, if not multiple headquarters, and he's got a custom Manta-themed submarine, and he's got Manta-themed lackeys, so the guy's gotta have money. Where does he get that money from? Is he literally just bringing up treasure from the bottom of the ocean and nobody cares? Does he enjoy having the money? Is Black Manta doing this because he's greedy, or did he grow up salvaging this stuff from the ocean and he enjoys that process, and then selling it and making money is just kind of a bonus effect? I have no flooping clue. And this guy was the main driving antagonist of this comic for 7 issues. That's over half a year of publication. And yes, that half a year was one story, a single contained narrative, so I wouldn't have wanted long tangents into the background of Black Manta and a ton of background material anyways. The narrative that we did get was incredibly solid, but I do think that there are some elements of it that suffer from being so decompressed and still trying to happen in the modern age. It's just part of how the game of decompressed storytelling is played, right? You could even make an argument that it is good that so much story material has been left on the table because it means that Geoff Johns, or another author, can explore those ideas later down the line. But there is no guarantee that another author is going to follow up on any of this stuff. And I like Geoff Johns' handling of the character, so in the immortal words of Veruca Salt, I want it now! Leaving an audience wanting more is fine. I do not have a problem with that. But it only works if you intend to give them more. Outside of Manta's story as a person, I do think there are some logic holes in his job during this story. Black Manta was clearly hired by someone in order to retrieve the scepter of the dead king, right? Either party, Black Manta or his buyer, could have known that the scepter was hidden in the tomb of the dead king. Arthur and the others searched the tome once before, and they didn't find it. But if they knew that it could be there, then maybe somebody else could have known that as well. That information maybe isn't common, but it's not a super secret. I'll buy that. I'm okay with that. But Manta clearly did not know about using the relics in order to find the scepter, because we learned that fact when he did in issue 12. So that means that Black Manta spent this entire arc hunting the others in order to steal their relics in the hopes that those relics did something. There is a certain logic there, as the relics were on display in the same room that the scepter was supposed to be in. Clearly there is some kind of connection between them. But Manta had no definitive idea that the relics did anything at all in terms of finding the seventh. And it's not like he questioned the others about the location of the scepter either. But if they are the ones who beat Manta to the relics to begin with, then I would think that they might know something about finding the scepter, or maybe hiding the scepter. At least they might know more than the inanimate relics did, right? We also don't know how Manta knew the locations of the others to begin with, which is kind of treated like a big question mark throughout the story, and by the time it ends, nobody has answered it. The operative brings up how Manta found them when he is in Manta's office. Yawara thought that Dr. Shin was the one who exposed their locations, but he didn't. So who the floop did? How did Black Manta begin to find them? And out of all of the characters to hunt, why would he not start with Dr. Shin? Vostok was on the moon. The operative stays on the moon thanks to the living room. Yawara, I don't know, I guess she lives in the jungles of South America. So finding one woman in all of that jungle can't be easy. Arthur, Kahina, and Prisoner would probably be the most conventional members to find, as they're kind of locked down to locations. Kahina has a family, Prisoner's in a hospital, Arthur owns the lighthouse, but Dr. Shin is way easier to find. He's just a public figure, and he doesn't have superpowers. Why not start with Dr. Shin? Especially since Manta started this story by hunting the woman who could see the future. The one person that I would think, out of all of the characters in this story arc, see him coming the easiest. From a storytelling perspective, that just doesn't make any sense. To be fair, I do think that there is a counter argument to be made that starting with Kahina does make sense. Because as far as we are told, Kahina's only superpower was seeing the future. She did not have the telepathic powers to command jaguars or ghosts, she did not have a super-powered spy suit, and she certainly did not live on the moon. In terms of the easiest member of the others to kill, it was probably Kahina. I still don't like her dying, and I don't like her being fridged to show how cool Black Manta is, and I wish that it hadn't happened, but it did happen, and I don't like it, and I'm not going to like it. Prisoner is a solid second pick for the person for Black Manta to hunt, as again, he is physically human. Keep those manacles off of him, and he is basically just a dude. And yeah, he might have additional ghost powers, but he is still just human. That said, why the floop didn't Manta just shoot him in the head with a harpoon? Or cut his throat from behind with one of his knives? The fight scene with Prisoner was dramatic and cool, sure, but if Manta's two goals in this story were to A, steal the relics, and B, kill the others as an act of revenge on Aquaman, then he sure picked the stupidest way to do it. That totally plays against how intelligent and cunning Geoff Johns portrayed him in all the rest of the story, so I am frustrated by that idea. And again, not that I want Prisoner to die, but that it doesn't make sense for Black Manta to show the character mercy when he hasn't shown mercy to other characters. I really do like the idea that Manta's half of this story actually has very little to do with Aquaman, right? Like, Arthur's focus for most of this story was getting back into the ring with Manta. But Black Manta basically tried to avoid Arthur when he was hunting the others. He ducked out of every fight that he could have had with him, and Manta was just doing his job. Sure, it was a job that would hurt Arthur at a distance, but it's not like his goal here was to kill Aquaman. And I kind of dig that. Especially since Arthur's half of the story dealt with how he had moved on from being an angry teenager and how that clashed with the others. That's really neat storytelling. For Arthur, this story presents as being about him getting revenge on Black Manta when it is really about his personal issues. And for Black Manta, this story presents as being about getting revenge on Aquaman when it's really about his job. That's a neat balance between these two rival forces, and it makes them interesting dark mirrors of each other, not just conceptually, but also within the narrative itself. Thank you, Konark. Bless you. The only lingering bit of Black Manta's story that really bothers me at all is that Kahina had a vision of him stabbing Arthur with his own trident. That clearly didn't happen here. So was she wrong? Or is that still going to happen? As for the others themselves, I like the general conceptual makeup of the team. There's a pretty good balance of powers, genders, life experiences, and character designs among them. Perhaps the thing that is most interesting to me is that I don't think any of them really look like superheroes. I mentioned before that these stories are really cementing Aquaman as more of an adventurer character, more than a superhero in my mind. And the others have that same sense of design, really. Kahina's outfit is incredibly pretty, but it's nothing that you might not see in reality. Yawara is a Frank Frazetta-style jungle babe, the operative is a spy, Prisoner was a soldier. Vostok honestly has probably the most comic book design, really. I get the feeling that he was meant to evoke the style of the sci-fi heroes of the 1940s and 50s, with his jetpack and his blaster gun and his goggles, at least before he got the Atlantean helmet. And even then, the Atlantean helmet perfectly fits his character, and it still leans more adventurer than superhero to me. I would also like to note that as a team, this unit never really comes together. Like, sure, they take orders from Aquaman in the final fight, but it's not like they're a finely tuned, highly honed, butt-kicking machine. They make mistakes, they get wounded, they bicker, and they argue a little bit. They feel a lot more human to me than, say, something like the Justice League does, and I think that's great. Johns and the creative team do tend to forget when the characters are wounded, though. Prisoner took a harpoon to the shoulder in issue 9, and nobody addresses it. The operative got shot in the side, and nobody addresses it. It's really uneven writing, given that Johns does write some really tense scenes threatening the very vulnerable human cast members, but then he ignores the repercussions of those very same scenes. The storytelling feels a little bit uneven when characters like Vostok and Kahina can get wounded and die on panel, because then I'm going, oh, characters can die, they're actually threatened. And then when characters get wounds that could lead to weakness in battle or eventual death, nobody cares, and they just power through anyways. And it would be one thing if, Prisoner had mentioned, oh man, my healing factor kicked in and took care of that harpoon shot in my shoulder. Or if the operative had mentioned how his suit sealed the bullet wound, giving him time to heal. Okay, great. I can buy those things. This is a comic book after all. But they don't happen, and nobody addresses them, and it's really frustrating. But it's also easy to see why Johns doesn't address them, right? Because I bet, dear listener, you didn't notice these things when I was telling you about these comics. A, there is a month wait between individual issues, so there's plenty of time to get caught up in everything else that's going on in your life when you're reading these things that you just forget. I forget. If I wasn't doing these breakdowns and specifically keeping track of these kinds of things while I am talking about the comics, I probably forgot as well. I forgot stuff like Vostok died. So, it happens. Comic books, as much as I love comic books and as big a part of my life as they are not the driving force of my life. And I forget stuff in them too. And I'm sure that Jeff Johns forgot these things, or the art team forgot these things, because they've got other things to do. And as much as I want comic books to be real and tell their stories in the best way possible, at the end of the day, they are comic books. And sometimes you just forget. I also like the conceptual idea that the others haven't grown as people in the years that they have been apart, while Arthur has. The prisoner remained hidden in the hospital. Vostok has been chilling on the moon, which is a phrase I still love. And I really got the feeling that the operative has been up to stuff behind the scenes all along, and we just don't know about any of it because he's a super spy. So if he did do something, you probably know the result, but you don't know the action. I won't lie. I was half expecting the operative to be the one supporting Manta, and that all the stuff we saw him doing was just going to be a fake out, so I'm glad to be wrong on that one. However, I don't think that this story element, as much as I like the idea of it, is really strong, as we are only just meeting the others in this story, and we have very little experience or concept of what they used to be like versus who they are. However, their lack of growth is not the story of this comic book. It is how much Arthur has grown in the meantime in comparison to them, and so that works really well. Plus, we do see Prisoner starting to contact the families of his deceased unit, so he is finally making forward progress. I do like Johns keeping Prisoner's real human identity and face a secret in the story, because it works as an incredible parallel to Arthur's story. Both men are haunted, but Arthur was motivated by his ghosts to be better, and Dominic was motivated by his ghosts to wallow in the pain. So where Arthur became a better man by wearing the Aquaman costume, Dominic becomes a better man by taking off his mask and finally being human again. That's beautiful. I do wish that the others were with him when he did this, though. I really felt like Prisoner's want in this story was to be more accepted by the others, for them to look at him as family in the same way that he looks at his unit as family. He makes a point of referencing how the others did not stay together, leaving him alone in the hospital, and when the story wraps up, he is the one who feels like they're abandoning him the most. So I like the story giving closure to the dead members of his unit, but I wish that the others went with him to support him. If they are supposed to be a found family, that's cool. Let them be a found family. This cannot be an easy thing for Dominic to do, and I just wish that there was somebody there to support him, whether that was Arthur or the entire unit or just some of the unit. I also wish that we saw something regarding Kahina's life in a postscript scene. We were told that Kahina has a family, at least a husband and a son in Tehran, and right now they have no idea what happened to her. She is lying dead in a South American jungle, and nobody seems to care. And that just feels incredibly gross. Especially since Arthur made a point of saving Vostok's body, and this whole arc is about demonstrating Arthur's growth as a person, right? That he isn't the angry, arrogant, uncaring, selfish young man anymore. He defends everyone. He tries to save as many lives as he can, even if they're in danger like the trench creatures. But if that's the case, why doesn't he take it upon himself to visit Kahina's family and deliver this terrible news? Especially since Johns has shown us that Kahina was the kind, caring member of the team. She is the one who gave Arthur hope for his future. And he thanks her by leaving her dead in the South American jungle, and it's just gross and frustrating. While I don't remember the others staying an active part of Aquaman's comic moving forward, which is a real shame in my opinion, and a bit of a waste of potential, they do actually get their own comic book, which is neat. It would take a few years, but in June of 2014, a new book spun out of Aquaman's ongoing series, called Aquaman and the Others. I never picked this book up as the main Aquaman ongoing series never referenced it, but I'm kind of thinking I might take a second look now. I just cannot believe that it took DC almost 2 years to spin them off. That seems like something you would want to do like a month or so after their initial story ends, right? Like, strike while the fan base's attention is hot, that kind of thing. 2 years later, man, I don't care that it happened. Like, I've moved on at that point. Like, yeesh. Overall, I think that this story rocked my socks off. It had thrilling action, interesting new characters, some real heartbreak, some great insights, and promises of more interesting things to come, which is always exciting. After all, Black Manta made a deal with whoever got the scepter that he would rule the surface after whatever it is that's going to happen happens. So something is still brewing in the oceans. And whoever that buyer was, they seem to be able to control storms. So, like, that's a pretty big thing, too. So there's more interesting stuff to come, and this is a point I cannot emphasize enough, the art team stayed together for the entire time. Ivan Reis, Joe Prado, and Rod Reis will have, once we cover issue 0 next episode, drawn 14 consecutive issues of Aquaman that, as far as I can remember, all released on time. That is not an easy thing to do, and I know of artists who have simpler art styles who can't handle 6 issues in a row, much less 14. And yeah, the art team did have some pitch-hitter inkers step in to help out, but there was no shame in that, as the quality of the book overall stayed incredibly consistent. This, quite simply, was a great story arc, and I don't think that I can suggest it enough. Yes, there are minor story issues, but honestly, it reads super well, and it is gorgeous to look at, and the character work is dope. And if you are interested in this book, I highly suggest that you do pick it up. This would make a really great trade paperback if you can't find it in the back issue bins of your local store. And of course, you can always read it online on Comixology, or I think DC has a DC Unlimited app where you can read their whole thing for a subscription fee. In either case, this volume of Aquaman, like this specific story of Aquaman, I think is probably one of the best things that I've covered on the show in terms of execution so far. Even with the minor continuity problems, this is still like a knockout of the park for me. This is great. Next week, we will be traveling back in time for Aquaman's 0 issue. Arthur abandoned the surface world after his father died, but Atlantis is one city in an ocean that covers 3/4 of the planet's surface. How did he find it? And would he be welcome there? Join me in a week for Comic Book Breakdown episode 26.9, The Prodigal Son Journeys. Everyone, there are a million podcasts vying for your time and attention, and I'd like to thank you for listening to mine. If you would like to get in touch with me to share a concern, request a series, compliment me, berate me, whatever you like, send me an email at cbbreakdown@gmail.com. Otherwise, thanks for listening.